The notification appeared at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, glowing ominously in the darkness of Marcus Chen's cramped studio apartment. As a digital anthropologist who specialized in online behavior patterns, he'd seen his share of disturbing content emerge from the depths of Reddit's most controversial subreddits. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was about to witness. The thread title was deceptively simple, *hypothetical. Alien contact is confirmed, but they're dying from an unknown plague. What would humanity's real response be? Posted in r/ask Reddit just 6 hours earlier. It had already amassed over 47,000 comments and was climbing rapidly. The original poster, username deleted, had painted a chilling scenario. Extraterrestrial visitors arrive on Earth, technologically superior but biologically vulnerable. They're dying from a mysterious pathogen, something their advanced medicine cannot cure. They come seeking help, offering knowledge in exchange for salvation. What started as intellectual speculation quickly transformed into something far more sinister. Marcus scrolled through the early responses, noting the initial wave of hopeful humanitarian comments. User u/stargazer_2099 wrote, "This could be humanity's chance to prove we've evolved beyond our primitive instincts. We should help them unconditionally." Another early commenter, u/sciencefan42, suggested, "Imagine the medical breakthroughs we could achieve by studying their biology. It could revolutionize medicine for both species." But as Marcus continued reading, he noticed a disturbing shift in tone. The thread's momentum had been hijacked by something much darker, something that made his academic training in human behavior feel woefully inadequate. The transformation began subtly. Comments that initially expressed cautious optimism slowly gave way to paranoid speculation. Users began questioning the aliens' true motives, their potential for deception, their hidden agendas. And then, as if a dam had burst, the thread exploded into a cesspool of humanity's most disturbing impulses. By hour 4, the thread had become a digital laboratory for exploring the darkest corners of human nature. The hypothetical scenario had stripped away society's thin veneer of civilization, revealing something that made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about his own species. The original scenario was elegant in its simplicity, yet profound in its implications. The anonymous poster had crafted what amounted to the ultimate test of human empathy. Beings from another world, clearly superior in technology and intelligence, reduced to the role of supplicants begging for help from a species they could easily dominate under normal circumstances. The aliens in this hypothetical were described as having traveled impossible distances to reach Earth, their ships powered by technologies that defied human understanding. They possessed knowledge that could solve climate change, cure diseases, and unlock the secrets of faster-than-light travel. Yet they were dying, not from violence or accident, but from a pathogen that attacked their biology in ways their science couldn't comprehend. The setup was a masterpiece of moral complexity. These beings weren't conquerors or invaders, they were refugees. They offered everything in exchange for the one thing they couldn't provide for themselves: survival. It was, in essence, a role reversal of countless human scenarios throughout history, the powerful reduced to pleading for mercy from those they once might have considered beneath them. But what emerged in the comments section revealed something far more disturbing than the original poster could have anticipated. The first sign of humanity's darker impulses appeared in a comment from u/realpolitic_now. Let's be honest here. We'd probably quarantine them first, study their disease, and see if we can weaponize it against them before deciding whether to help. This comment, posted just 90 minutes after the original thread, received over 3,000 upvotes and spawned a discussion thread that would eventually consume the entire post. It was as if someone had opened Pandora's box, and the contents were spilling out faster than anyone could contain them. User u/historybuff_1965 replied, "Exactly. Look at every first contact scenario in human history. The technologically superior group always dominates the inferior one. This is our chance to flip the script. The responses that followed revealed a disturbing pattern. Rather than seeing the aliens' vulnerability as an opportunity for compassion, many users viewed it as leverage. The hypothetical scenario had become a thought experiment in exploitation, manipulation, and revenge. U/Survival First commented, "Why would we help them when we could just let them die and take their technology? They're already dying anyway. We'd just be accelerating the inevitable." The comment received 8,400 upvotes. As Marcus read through these responses, he began to understand that the thread had tapped into something primal and ugly within human nature. The scenario wasn't just testing empathy. It was revealing the cold calculus that many people applied when confronted with the suffering of others, even beings from another world seeking nothing more than a chance to survive. But this was only the beginning. The truly disturbing content was still to come. By the 6th hour, the thread had transformed into something that defied Marcus's understanding of normal human discourse. The comments had organized themselves into distinct categories of cruelty, each more disturbing than the last. He found himself documenting them with the detached fascination of a scientist, studying a particularly virulent strain of bacteria. The exploitation brigade formed the largest group. These users had moved beyond simple neglect to active manipulation of the aliens' desperate situation. U/businessminded_2024 laid out a detailed plan. Step 1. Promise to help them. Step 2. Extract all their technology and scientific knowledge first. Step 3. Use their desperation to make them dependent on us. Step 4. Once we have everything we need, decide whether they're worth keeping around. The comment spawned an entire subthread of users, refining and improving upon this strategy. U/Leverage King added, "We could keep a few alive as consultants, but make sure they understand their place in the new hierarchy. They'd be grateful servants instead of potential threats." The Revenge faction took a different approach, viewing the scenario as cosmic justice for humanity's perceived place as the underdog in the universe. U/Cosmic Karma_777 wrote, "For once, the advanced species needs US. Do you know how many sci-fi movies show aliens wiping us out without a second thought? Time to return the favor. Let them experience what it's like to be the inferior species begging for scraps." This sentiment resonated with thousands of users. The thread became a repository for accumulated resentment against fictional alien invaders, as if users were settling scores with every movie monster and literary antagonist that had ever threatened humanity. But it was the experimentation enthusiasts who produced the most chilling content. These users viewed the dying aliens as the ultimate laboratory specimens. U/medical curiosity_PhD suggested, "Think about it rationally. They're dying anyway. Why not use their bodies for medical research while they're still alive? We could learn more about alien biology in a few months than we might in decades of peaceful study. Their sacrifice could benefit both species." The clinical detachment in such comments was what disturbed Marcus the most. These weren't sadistic fantasies born of obvious malice. They were reasoned arguments that treated sentient beings as disposable resources. The users weren't monsters. They were ordinary people who had somehow convinced themselves that cruelty could be logical. U/ethically flexible expanded on this theme. We'd be doing them a favor, really. Instead of dying slowly from disease, they could contribute to scientific advancement. It's not murder if they're already terminal, and it's not torture if it serves a greater purpose. The comment received 12,000 upvotes and 400 Reddit Gold awards. As Marcus scrolled deeper into the thread, he discovered what he came to think of as the philosophical justification squad. These users had constructed elaborate moral frameworks to rationalize their cruelty. U/utilitarian truth argued, "The greatest good for the greatest number. Earth has 8 billion humans. Their planet might have billions of their own species. But they came here making themselves our responsibility. If sacrificing a few hundred aliens saves both civilizations, it's not just acceptable, it's morally imperative. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the content of these comments, but their popularity. Each cruel suggestion was met with thousands of upvotes, dozens of awards, and comment threads filled with users refining and improving upon the original cruelty. It was as if the entire platform had become a collaborative workshop for designing the perfect betrayal. But perhaps most unsettling of all were the historical precedent scholars. Users who drew parallels between their hypothetical alien abuse and actual historical atrocities. U/lessons from history_1 wrote, "This is exactly what European colonizers did to indigenous populations. Promise help, extract resources, eliminate the threat when they're no longer useful. The difference is, this time we'd be the technologically inferior species pulling off the con job." Poetic justice. The comment wasn't condemning historical atrocities, it was celebrating them as strategic templates. As dawn broke over Marcus's apartment, he realized he had spent the entire night documenting what might be the most comprehensive catalog of human cruelty ever assembled. The thread had become a mirror, and the reflection it showed was almost too dark to comprehend. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes as the morning light filtered through his blinds. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he hadn't noticed. His academic mind was struggling to process what he'd witnessed, not just the individual comments, but the collective enthusiasm with which Reddit's community had embraced such disturbing ideas. The anonymity factor couldn't fully explain what he'd seen. Yes, people often expressed darker thoughts online than they would in person, but this went beyond typical keyboard warrior behavior. This was systematic, collaborative cruelty designed by committee. Users weren't just venting personal frustrations. They were building upon each other's ideas, creating increasingly sophisticated frameworks for exploitation and abuse. What disturbed Marcus most was the rationality of it all. These weren't random outbursts of anger or fear. They were carefully reasoned arguments that treated cruelty as a logical response to opportunity. Users had taken the time to construct ethical frameworks that justified betrayal, detailed strategies for exploitation, and philosophical rationales for genocide. The thread had revealed something that his years of studying online behavior had only hinted at. When people believe they're facing an existential scenario, the normal social contracts that govern behavior don't just weaken, they invert entirely. Cruelty becomes pragmatism, betrayal becomes strategy, and exploitation becomes survival. But the most chilling realization was how closely the thread's themes paralleled real-world events. Marcus began connecting the dots between the hypothetical alien scenario and humanity's historical pattern of behavior when confronted with vulnerable populations. The exploitation brigade strategies directly mirrored colonial expansion tactics. Promise aid, extract resources, establish dependency, eliminate threat. It was the European colonization playbook applied to an interplanetary scenario, right down to the post hoc moral justifications. The experimentation enthusiasts echoed the rhetoric of historical medical abuses. From Unit 731's biological experiments to the Tuskegee syphilis study, humanity had a well-documented history of treating vulnerable populations as disposable laboratory subjects. The aliens in the thread were just the latest proposed victims in a pattern that stretched back centuries. The revenge faction's cosmic justice arguments paralleled every genocide justified as historical correction. The Nazis claimed to be settling accounts with Jewish oppressors. Rwandan genocidaires portrayed Tutsis as colonial collaborators who deserved retribution. The thread's users were applying the same logic to fictional aliens who had committed no crime beyond possessing superior technology. Even the philosophical justification squad was following established patterns. Every atrocity in human history had been dressed up in intellectual respectability. Slavery was justified through racial science. genocide through demographic necessity, colonization through civilizing missions. The Reddit thread was generating new versions of these same apologetic, adapted for an alien context. Marcus realized that the thread wasn't revealing anything new about human nature. It was demonstrating how quickly people could rediscover humanity's worst impulses when presented with the right scenario. The hypothetical aliens were serving as a blank slate onto which users could project every dark fantasy they'd ever harbored about power, control, and revenge. The global nature of Reddit meant that these responses weren't limited to any single culture or nationality. Users from dozens of countries had contributed to the thread, suggesting that the dark impulses it revealed were universal rather than culturally specific. The capacity for cruelty, it seemed, transcended borders, languages, and ideologies. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the thread's popularity. It wasn't being discussed in some dark corner of the internet by a fringe community of sociopaths. It was trending on one of the world's largest social media platforms, attracting mainstream users who were enthusiastically participating in what amounted to a collaborative fantasy about interspecies genocide. Marcus had spent his career studying how digital spaces amplified human behavior, but he'd always assumed they primarily amplified existing tendencies. The alien thread suggested something far more troubling. That digital platforms didn't just amplify our worst impulses, they normalized them. As Marcus finally closed his laptop, the alien thread had reached over 200,000 comments and had been shared across multiple platforms. It was trending on Twitter, being discussed in YouTube reaction videos, and had spawned copycat threads in dozens of other subreddits. What had started as a single hypothetical question had metastasized into a global conversation about humanity's darkest impulses. The thread's impact extended far beyond its original scope. Mental health professionals began commenting on the psychological implications of such widespread cruel fantasizing. Philosophers debated whether the responses revealed authentic human nature or were simply the product of digital disinhibition. Sociologists analyzed the thread as evidence of deeper cultural anxieties about power, control, and survival. But for Marcus, the most disturbing aspect wasn't the academic implications, it was the personal ones. As he read through thousands of comments celebrating cruelty and exploitation, he couldn't escape the uncomfortable truth that many of these users were probably his neighbors, co-workers, and friends. The anonymity of Reddit had allowed them to express thoughts that polite society normally kept hidden, but those thoughts had originated somewhere. The thread had become more than a hypothetical scenario. It was a stress test of human morality, and the results were deeply unsettling. When presented with vulnerable beings seeking help, a significant portion of humanity's first instinct wasn't compassion, but exploitation. When offered the chance to be the superior species in a first contact scenario, the immediate response wasn't wisdom or benevolence, but revenge and cruelty. Marcus found himself wondering if the thread's popularity stemmed from its ability to articulate feelings that many people harbored but rarely acknowledged. Did the responses resonate with users because they reflected authentic human impulses, or because they provided permission to explore dark fantasies that civilization normally suppressed? The alien scenario had stripped away the usual social and cultural contexts that guided moral behavior. Without established norms, legal frameworks, or social consequences, users had defaulted to something primal and ugly. It suggested that civilization wasn't an evolutionary advancement, but a fragile construct that required constant maintenance to prevent humanity from reverting to its darker impulses. As the days passed, the thread continued to generate discussion and controversy. Some users began posting follow-up comments expressing regret about their earlier responses, claiming they'd gotten caught up in the moment, or were just playing devil's advocate. But the damage was done. The thread had documented in unprecedented detail what happened when people believed they could act without moral constraints. The alien thread had become a digital artifact, a preserved specimen of human nature at its worst. It would likely be studied by researchers, referenced by philosophers, and remembered by anyone who witnessed it as proof of humanity's capacity for collaborative cruelty. But perhaps the thread's most important contribution wasn't what it revealed about human nature in the abstract. It was what it revealed about the specific humans who participated in it. These weren't fictional characters or historical figures whose moral failings could be safely dismissed as products of different times and circumstances. These were contemporary people living in the same world, breathing the same air, and sharing the same digital spaces as everyone else. The thread had held up a mirror to humanity, and the reflection it showed was almost too dark to bear. But ignoring that reflection wouldn't make it any less real. The capacity for cruelty, exploitation, and betrayal wasn't an abstract philosophical concept. It was a living reality that dwelled within ordinary people, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Marcus realized that the thread's true horror wasn't the hypothetical suffering of fictional aliens. It was the very real demonstration of how quickly and enthusiastically humans could embrace cruelty when they believed it served their interests. The aliens were just props in a much larger and more disturbing revelation about who we really are when we think nobody is watching. The thread would eventually fade from memory, buried beneath the endless scroll of new content that defined digital culture. But the questions it raised would linger. What does it mean to be human when humanity's first instinct is often cruelty? How thin is the veneer of civilization that separates us from our darkest impulses? And most disturbingly of all, if this is how we respond to fictional suffering, how can we trust ourselves to respond better to real suffering when it actually matters? The alien thread had started as a thought experiment about first contact, but it had become something much more profound and troubling, a comprehensive documentation of humanity's shadow self, preserved in digital amber for future generations to study and, hopefully, to learn from. In the end, the thread's most important lesson might not have been about aliens at all. It might have been about the urgent need for humans to confront the darkness within themselves before that darkness consumed everything else. The notification light on Marcus's phone blinked once more. Another thread was trending. What would you do if you found out your neighbor was secretly an alien? He turned off his phone and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The questions raised by the alien thread would haunt him for years to come, as they should haunt anyone who witnessed humanity's darkest impulses on full display in the digital age. The aliens in the scenario never got their help. But perhaps that was never the point. Perhaps the real purpose of the thread was to reveal something much more important and terrifying, that when faced with the ultimate test of compassion, humanity had failed spectacularly, and had done so while celebrating its failure. The screen had gone dark, but the mirror it had provided would continue reflecting long after the last comment was posted and the last upvote was cast. And in that reflection, anyone willing to look honestly would see not just the face of humanity at its worst, but a warning about what we're all capable of becoming when we think the rules no longer apply.